This evening is the first Sunday in Lent, and we are beginning our new worship series, and it is called Scandalous Jesus. I'm really excited about the series. I'm excited about the preachers who are going to be preaching and the stories that they're going to be telling. And what I'm really excited about is that this series is really about us going back and recovering who is this Jesus that we claim to follow. Scandalous. Scandalous means causing a general public outrage by a perceived offense against morality or law. Like a series of scandalous liaisons. If there is one thing that we know about Jesus, Jesus was scandalous. Why? Because Jesus upset the way people thought things were supposed to be, the way that people got comfortable, the way things were organized to be. Jesus is scandalous. And quite frankly, if we are going to be the ones who follow in the way of Jesus, if that's really what we're going to be about, then we need to be scandalous as well. In the reading that Hank just did, I love the line where Jesus says, if people are upset with you, if you're finding yourself persecuted and prosecuted for my sake, no worries. My prophets have always gotten in that kind of trouble. Following Jesus is about getting into a better kind of trouble. It's getting into trouble for all of the right reasons. It is what the founding narrative of this congregation in this denomination have always been about. 50 years ago, it was scandalous for people to meet, LGBTQ people to gather together and to believe that they were part of God's narrative and part of God's story, and to worship God and to offer the sacraments and to welcome all kinds of people in. It was absolutely scandalous. But it's because we got in that kind of trouble. People were willing to risk their lives and risk their necks and risk their professions and risk their jobs that we are still here today. It was through that work, through that witness, that hearts were open, that minds were open, that churches around the world were open. This little movement that we are a part of literally changed Christianity and the world for good. Because we were, and Jesus always calls us to be a little bit scandalous for all the right reasons. You know, when I was in seminary, one of the required activities was for us to go to different worshiping communities. And so at one point or another, a couple from the Presbyterian seminary that I was actually attending decided that they were going to come and check out MCC. They had heard all kinds of things about it. They had heard all kinds of things about it. And they weren't quite sure what to make of it or what to do. And so they came to the early service one Sunday morning, a little bit nervous. They met me just before worship service. I got them seated, sat them down, and then went about my business. After worship service, I checked in to find out how it was for them. The fellow said, he looked around. He grew up in the Presbyterian church, and he said, you know, the most amazing thing, he said, this is the first congregation that I have ever been in where I look around, and it's like people are actually happy to be here. Not only that, his wife soon joined in, and she said, we've been together for over a decade. We attend worship service. We take communion. This is the first time in their life, because of the way that we do communion, that they were able to celebrate communion together as a couple. She said, this is like totally amazing. In the Presbyterian church, it would even be scandalous. So I turned, and they said, we're going to come to the 11 o'clock service. And I'm like, It's like pretty much exactly the same. And they're like, that's okay. We've decided that we need to experience this kind of worship again. It is scandalous for us to live small. It is scandalous for us to think that the MCC doesn't have something for us to give and to share and to continue to help to transform hearts and minds and souls and lives. If anything, the recent decision by the United Methodist Church in their movement towards doubling down on prohibitions against same-sex couples and LGBTQ clergy is a reminder that we still have powerful prophetical witness and powerful prophetic work yet to do. One of my favorite authors, Brian Mclaren, he tells the story. I went to a conference that he was at, and he said, there was a time where faith and religion, that was the place that people went to their churches and their faith communities in order to make the world a better place. He said, for thousands and thousands and thousands of young adults and youths and other people who stand on the margins of society, faith and religion, especially the Christian faith and religion, is broken. It's like all of the stuff that Jesus has talked about, all of the rhetoric about love, about peace, and about hope. Somehow it has failed to resonate not just with the words, but with our hearts and with our lives. He said this point really struck him home. He said when one day he was invited to a conference, and he was there, and there was going to be this workshop where there were hundreds of youth and young adults who were present, and somebody was going to present something, and at the last minute they canceled out. And so the organizers turned to him and asked if he could do something. He said, I totally panicked. Not knowing what to do, he said, I walked into the room, and two questions presented themselves. And so I turned to the people who were there, and I said, so I have two questions for you. The first is, what are the greatest concerns of your congregations, your churches, your communities, and the groups that you participate in? And he said they quickly created this whole list. And it was all of these questions about the kind of music and who could preside at communion and whether or not they could ordain women, let alone LGBTQ people. It was all of these questions about who was in and who was out, what was the right way to do this and what was the right way to do that. It was all of the things that make the people in charge feel safe and feel comfortable. And then he said, I turned to the same group and I asked them the second question. So what are the greatest concerns of the world? And he said they quickly went to work and they created a list. And it was things like global warming and the environment, prejudice and racism, violence, disease, and destruction. And then he said, I let them go off into small groups and talk amongst themselves and to reflect on these two lists and to wonder, what might our faith tell us about these things that we see? He said when he gathered people back together again and they started to share, they pretty much came to a very quick consensus. That first list, the first list were the cares and the concerns that distracted us. They were all about us trying to address our fears. And he said, one person stuck up their hand and they said, you know what? If we addressed and fixed all of those different things that are on that particular list, something else would fill in the blank. It's a never-ending list that distracts us from actually doing the work that's on that other list. And then somebody else chimed in, he said, and said, and you know what? If Jesus himself walked through those doors, there's only one of these two lists that he'd be concerned about. And his biggest concern would be all of the people who have been hurt by everything that we listed on both of these lists. It ought to be scandalous. Too often, too many of the MCCs that I have actually been part of and have served, one of the biggest challenges is that we have looked at the mainline denominations and the mainline churches, and we have tried to mimic and tried to have everything that they have. We've adopted their theologies. We've taken on their forms of worship, their challenges, and quite frankly, all of the concerns from that first list, the kind of music and the style of worship and the this and the that. our founding narrative is for us to be scandalous, and it means that we need to figure out how we become scandalous once more. Jesus gathers up his followers, sits them down, and then explains. We're each called, blessed to be a blessing, and here's what that blessing looks like. It doesn't mean that we're all comfortable and that we are safe. We are blessed through our challenges. We are blessed through life's messiness. We are blessed when people are opposing us, if we are being opposed because we are trying to do the right kinds of things. What is so important to me is that this list of blessings, too often we rattle them off or we take them out of context. And it's sort of like, yeah, the poor will always be among us, but they're blessed. Isn't that nice? Blessings, the blessings that we get is that because it is in those challenges that we have a fire in our belly. Jesus ends this list of blessings by reminding people that they are to be the salt of the earth, but salt that has lost its saltiness is of no use and no good to anyone. It is like all of these challenges that Jesus is actually telling us. The reason why we are blessed is because it is through those blessings that we become a little bit salty and maybe perhaps a little bit scandalous. He goes on, you are called to be the light of the world. It's like maybe all of the challenges that we have, the anger that we have at the way the injustices of the world continue to be perpetrated, even by the people within the Christian faith in the church, maybe that might be the spark that gives us the courage to be the light that continues to show the path to the kind of love and the kind of justice and the kind of humility that God has called us to demonstrate to the world since the beginning. It is scandalous when we live small or when we play small. It is scandalous when we wallow within our hurt and within our fears. It is scandalous, and it ought to be scandalous, the way we come together in order to worship, if that worship empowers us to go out into our community, our city, in our world, and do the right kinds of things. There is a fellow, his name is Tony Nalosko, and he writes this poem, and it is called Goodbye to Life in the Margins. And for me, when I read this poem, I think about Jesus sitting there, gathering together the people and telling them how they are blessed and how scandalous that message might have been. He says, very early on, I curled up into a fetal position and shut my eyes, thinking this would do forever. There are times when we may feel really challenged and really hurt by our experiences. And certainly, there are times when we might need to curl up for a little while. But that time has to pass. He goes on, but more time has passed, and these sleeping desires will no longer be denied. Something has caught up with me, so goodbye to this life in the margins. There is no other choice now but to rejoice or die. No more days of just hanging in there instead of reaching for the stars. The pain of the past hurts is my energy supply. The lessons of the past mistakes is my compass. The mediocre will never do again. We have been initiated, and there is no turning back. We know what the sacred is, and it is everything. All the work is now gladly shared as we take care of one another. There is no more time to do anything except thrive. No more opportunity for anything other than laughter. Can you see it? God has spotted us. Can you see? Even from the great distance, God's arms are open wide. For me, this is what the scandalous Jesus is all about. For me, this is what living in a scandalous way is all about. This is what the purity and the truth of what I think the Christian message and the Jesus story needs to be about. It is for us to use all of the challenges and all of the hurts and all of the ways that we have felt and experienced pain for ourselves or witnessed that kind of pain in the eyes and in the hurts of another. That we use that as the energy and the motivation so that we do not stand silent. We do not worry about who we may offend. That we find the energy to be the kind of church that God raised up 50 years ago and has called us to be, and to be that kind of church in the city, in our community, and for the world once more. That may be a little bit scandalous, but doing nothing is not an option. May God continue to bless us and challenge us and give us the courage to be a little bit scandalous once more. Amen.